Hello. I had not intended to put up a new Good People Are Gooding video until after the new year, but then I realized that tonight is the longest night of the year, and at the same time, something has happened in our community that has made me realize that maybe this is the right time to introduce myself, because I haven't done that yet. So, hello. I'm Reverend Amanda-Gayle Reed, and I'm the pastor at Gooding United Methodist Church. I'm not a Gooding native, but have proudly called it home for the past 4.5 years. I was born and raised in West Virginia, and that's where I still am firmly rooted in my life. My family is still in West Virginia, and it's also the resting place of so many of my ancestors, because my ancestors have called the Appalachian Mountains home since the 1680s. But this week, as I've sat with some young people who are reeling from the suicide of someone that they knew and loved, I've been thinking a lot about my own youthful story that took place 2,000 miles away and nearly 3 decades ago. I can't believe it was that long ago. But you see, as a grade school student, I was suffering from troubling episodes of depression. Now, I was too young at the time to know what depression meant, but I knew that there was something going deep inside of me that needed help, and I didn't know how to ask for it. So by the time I was in the 6th grade, those episodes were beginning to take a pretty frightening turn as I began contemplating suicide. I was only 11 years old, and I already felt like the only way to end the constant internal hurt was to end my life. Now, on the surface, you would have never thought that about me, because I looked like every other kid. I seemed happy and well-adjusted. I had parents who were happily married and who were loving and supportive of their children. I was involved in a good church. I made decent grades. But under the surface was a lot of hurt and loneliness. And by junior high, I was starting to kind of test the waters, trying to find help by hinting at the dark thoughts, but I didn't really know how to fully express what I was feeling. And so as a result, my confessions were often dismissed by the adults I was talking to as typical teenage angst. So I learned to stuff my feelings deeper, and that made me feel even lonelier. Now, the thing about depression is that it ebbs and flows, and a lot of people didn't know that. So when I tried to explain to them that I was feeling depressed, it would be dismissed because they would point out all of those periods of time when I was happy and carefree as any kid should be. But then there were those dark periods, and it was becoming harder and harder for me to navigate them. Each new episode seemed deeper and darker than the last. Then one day when I was just 16 years old, I broke the rules at school. That was something I never did. I was a good kid. I was called to the office, and that was something that was new and horrifying to me. And I was given detention. And I'll be honest, I didn't even know where detention was held in my school. So for a goody two-shoes like me, hearing the vice principal call my parents and leave that message, telling them what I had done, it felt like the end of the world. And so I wound up setting into motion a series of events that would eventually lead to the single worst decision of my life. See, I was devastated, and I left school early, and so now I'm skipping school, and I walked home, contemplating the idea of running away, but I was too naive to know where to go. So I just went home anyway, and I sat in a dark, empty house, waiting for my parents to come home and be disappointed in me. And that feeling of loneliness just grew heavier by the second, until I finally got up and swallowed a handful of pills. Now, I was one of the lucky ones, because my mother found me and got me to the hospital in time for my stomach to be pumped, and for the treatment to counter the effects of the pills to be successful. And I wish I could say that just like that, things got better afterward, but it didn't. I mean, it took a long time. This was the mid-90s after all, and it was Appalachia, and there was still a lot of stigma around mental health issues, and therapy was often seen as a threat to a lot of parents. And so my high school They only required that I attend one counseling session before I returned back to school, and so that was all I did. I didn't attend any more after that. So I was right back to where I had been, trying to handle it all on my own and not knowing what to do. Now, depression would come and go throughout the remainder of my teenage years and into my early 20s until there was a second suicide attempt when I was 23. But now that was when things did begin to change because I was older, a little more mature, and I was able to finally make the most important choice of my life, and that was to seek therapy. And through therapy, I learned how to cope with depression. I learned how to identify my triggers and to see the red flags. I learned how to ask for help. Most importantly, I learned that I was not alone. Over time, I learned how the seasons affect my mood. I learned medicine was not a sign of weakness, but it was actually a necessity to keep the chemistry in my brain where it needed to be. I learned that taking a daily antidepressant was just as important as a diabetic taking their insulin. And as I built all of these new coping skills, I found healing. I do still struggle with episodes of depression from time to time, but they are no longer constantly getting worse. I've learned how to identify them early on and to acknowledge that they are there and then to cope with them so that they don't take over my life. And on those occasions when it does start to feel too overwhelming, I know to reach out and ask for help. Now, I wanted to tell you this because I know this community that I've adopted as my own is hurting right now. I know a lot of you are wondering why this had to happen to such a good young man and what could have been done differently. But I really don't think those are the right questions we should be asking right now. We can't go back and change anything. People will tell us that hindsight is 20/20, but I actually say it's a very distorting thing to our vision. We look back with all the knowledge we have now and assume that we should have been able to see the future or to read minds back then. And we beat ourselves up for it. Sometimes we beat others up for perceived misdeeds because of it. So please don't do that to yourself. Most of us are struggling to do the best that we can with what we have at any given moment. And to judge our past based on what we know now is unfair to ourselves. So if you really wish you had done something differently, don't spend your time looking back in self-loathing, but instead commit yourself to doing it differently in the future. A simple fact of life is that we all hurt sometimes. So there will always be another opportunity for you to step up and to be the person we wished we had been in the past. By looking ahead to how we can be different, we are making a positive impact on the world and helping to make it a better place by becoming better people ourselves. So now I want to say to you parents that if you're a parent and you think your child is struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts, please let them know that it's okay to talk about it and it's okay to ask for help. Getting your child into counseling or into a support group does not make you a failure or weak. It's actually the exact opposite. It makes you a hero. It makes you a hero because you are the parent who was willing to fight for your child, the one who turned over every stone looking for help and answers, and that makes you a tremendous example of parental love. And if you are a person who is struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts now, please know that you are not alone and that there are people who can help. There are people who know what it's like because we've been there too. Tonight is the longest night of the year, and many churches around the world are hosting Blue Christmas services in which we acknowledge the darkness that surrounds us. And it's a time for people to be able to just acknowledge that even in a season associated with joy, it's okay to admit that we might be hurting. It's okay to ask someone to sit with you in that moment of hurt and to help you find a way out of it. It's It's only when we acknowledge that we are in this darkness that we can begin to search out those points of light that can help lead us out of it. I'm always reminded of Elizabeth when I think about my issues of depression around Christmas time. Elizabeth is a part of the Christmas story that we often gloss right over. But Elizabeth, in her old age, had a lot of burdens and worries. She had not been able to bear her husband, a child, and without a son, she would have felt like she had been a failure in her own life because she hadn't been able to give her husband that thing he needed to carry his legacy on according to the culture of their time. And so, as bad as she must have been feeling, the miracle of Christmas, though, touched her just as well as it touched her younger cousin Mary, because even Elizabeth was given the chance to bring new life and new hope into the world. Now, when Mary sought out her older cousin, they became this unlikely duo. Here was this older woman well beyond childbearing years who was heavy with child, and here's this young, unwed mother who is filled with a hope that is going to change the world. They both had reasons to be worried and to be afraid. They both carried heavy burdens, but they had each other through it all, and together they found reasons to rejoice for one another. So we can become, like Mary and Elizabeth, one another's support system this Christmas. Just like Elizabeth and Mary, we can help each other find reasons to rejoice. So be willing to look for help when it feels like it's getting to be too much. Be there for each other. And when we hold each other in loving relationship like Mary and Elizabeth did, we'll see that there is a light of hope burning in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. Now tonight is the longest night of the year. We're going to have more darkness tonight than we will have any other night of the year. And yet, when it's over, the light will begin to chase out the darkness. So hold on for one more night and reach out for each other. And may you all have a Merry Christmas.